Okay, guys, please. Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. I can recognize quite a few of you, but there is a lot of new faces as well, so the pleasure is all mine. Thank you very much again for everybody who is here first time. I hope you will be coming again and again. And tonight we're going to be talking about Marcus Aurelius, or more precisely Caesar Marcus Aurelius Antonius Augustus. He's got many other titles as well, like Germanicus and Paters, Patri, etc., etc. But it's important to be philosophical when it comes down to Marcus Aurelius, because if I can remind you, the moon has two sides, one which shines and is bright, and we see that all the time, but there is another side to it, which we don't. Now, because we are all lovers of wisdom here, not to say philosophers, I hope you will approve my approach tonight. So I will try to present to you not only the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, although he even doubts himself as a philosopher, and you will see why. But what is clearly compelling is that Marcus Aurelius is very, very popular. So 2000 years after his death, we are still talking about him. He's the most quoted philosopher, more quoted than Socrates, than Plato, than Aristotle, who were all much, much bigger philosophers than him. But for some reason, somebody who wasn't even a philosopher by trade, somebody who was a Roman emperor, became so popular with his thoughts and ideas about how to live life justly and in fulfilling way. So, as Nietzsche said, if you want to understand certain philosophy, you first need to understand the philosopher. Because for Nietzsche, philosophy was in a way autobiography of its author. So when a philosopher writes about certain issues, he is reflecting his own views, his own soul, as Nietzsche would say, his own drives, which is more important, drives, which are all these inner forces, like passions, emotions, instincts, not to forget reason as well. So if we try to understand Marcus Aurelius, the man who captivated our interest for so long, we should remind ourselves that he was the emperor of Rome for 19 years. So he was born in 121, died in 180, but since 161 till 180, for 19 years, he was the emperor of Rome. So just to remind you what Rome was, we all know about Rome, the famous empire that lasted 1400 years, that conquered the most of the known world. But I am afraid that we often, more often than we should, we romanticize about Rome more than we try to be philosophical minds and look at that moon, which has two sides. So it's not only the culture that is fascinating when it comes down to Rome, but also you should ask yourself, how are empires built and why they existed in the first place? What was the reason for that? So Rome conquered lots of territories in the Middle East, in North Africa, clearly in Europe, even these isles. And just to remind you that conquest of the empire is not only or necessarily coming knocking on the door of the new nation or a new state and saying, look, guys, we are here to give you the culture and build roads and aqueducts and help you live better lives, and then people will accept them. that wasn't the case ever with no single empire. So Rome, in order to conquer that, had to commit lots of atrocities across the field. We would call it today war crimes. They didn't call it that way in the past. But just to remind you, for 500 years of Roman rule in Britain, a British population of 3 million people at the time was decimated. There's some estimates that between 250,000 and 400,000 people have been killed by Romans here. Now, why am I telling you all of this? Just to remind you that on the top of that pyramid of an empire of that size sits the emperor, and everything that happens within the empire has to be approved by the emperor. So Marcus was one of them, and I'm not really happy to see how his ideas written in the meditation have been trivialized, especially in modern times, where all of a sudden everybody is a Stoic philosopher. Everybody has Marcus Aurelius as his hero without really knowing what Stoicism is in essence, and who was this guy, this emperor. There were a lot of atrocities committed during his time, and for some of them he was responsible directly. For example, there were atrocities against Christians, and people who didn't believe in Roman gods, who believed in Christ, they were thrown to animals, wild beasts, ripped apart, etc. And he was not very friendly with them. But you see, people don't talk about it, people don't see that. So we should not forget this side of his character. Now, having said that, the question that begs an answer is, what is Marcus Aurelius doing by writing those thoughts and ideas in the diary, which in the beginning used to be called precepts, and then writings to himself, and then meditations. So they were not called meditations in the beginning. Marcus Aurelius didn't write these meditations, as you know them now, to be published. He wrote them for himself. He didn't want them to be published ever, and he even asked for them to be burned and destroyed. But fortunately, whoever was in charge of this manuscript kept it, and then it came out and became as popular as we know now. So, what is Marcus Aurelius trying to do with meditations? He says in book 8 that he is aware of difficulties being an emperor. Obviously, he doesn't say what is going on under his command, but he's saying that it is very difficult to be a philosopher. Actually, he questions, he says, I know that I will never be a philosopher. So what is this? What is the aim of these writings? What is he trying to do? He's trying to redeem himself. He's looking for penance. But he can't find it outside. He can't find it with his gods. He can't find it with people around himself. He can only find it within himself. So he is looking for redemption. And this is the main reason why he writes these things. Not to be published, not to tell us what to do, but to remind himself, to warn himself about his past and about his remaining life, whatever it is, he says, how that life should be lived. He is very aware of all the negative sides of ruling such an empire. Waging wars, for example, he was involved for 9 years with the Germanic tribes. He was directly involved in them. And then not just them, but also around Danube River in Pannonia, he was fighting Dacians and Thracians and other tribes. And only in one place he reminds us about trivialities and wastefulness of human life. He says, if you have seen limbs cut off and heads severed from the body, then you will wonder how much is this life worth living as it is. So he was there right in the place when Rome was achieving great victories through atrocities. Don't forget, Rome was the cancer for every nation and every country around them. None of them was happy to be with them. But because they were so dominant and so powerful, they forced all these other countries to stay together as long as they could have. But eventually that exploded at the end. And we have now just the memory of that. Although there was another attempt to recreate that empire by British Empire, and later by Nazi Germany. But all the British Empire lasted 400 years, nothing too much Roman Empire. And Nazi ideology didn't last that long. Attempts were very similar in nature. So when an emperor starts talking about people around you, praise, passions, material wealth, desires, pleasures, can we trust it? However, this is just a reminder for the discussion and questions that you can ask later on. After I go quickly through meditations. Everything around Marcus Aurelius orbits around power and submission to power. So what we have today, to remind us about his power, we had that famous column in Rome, in Piazza Colonna, and then we have that equestrian statue, bronze statue of him on the horse. You can see the power of the man, and on that column they are depicted all the different battles where Rome won and conquered new territories, and everything is like history in one place. Everything is monumental. But it seems to me that even more monumental is what he has left us through his writings. So his meditations, they're also about power, but power over oneself, submission to power. We will see what power he talks about. This is the power of directing mind, as he says. Power of directing mind. There are a lot of ideas, a lot of thoughts scattered throughout the book. So the book is not really written to be a book. It's just his ideas and his feelings and his thoughts whenever they came, wherever they came. He was writing this for about 5 years, around 170 to 175. And there were a few subjects that he tackles there. So I will just remind you of a few subjects without going too much into detail because it will take a long time. One of them is he talks about the nature of the whole. He tries to remind us that the universal nature is something that we belong to, and everything is ordered in that whole. So humans can only experience things which are actually created for them. In a way, the message is whatever happens to you, more or less could have happened, should have happened. So don't really be upset because of that, because you are the part of the whole. And whatever happens is like for the higher purpose. This is the idea of the whole, the universal nature. So don't complain about, oh, I'm short, I'm too tall, I'm blonde, I'm brown, I'm man, I'm woman, etc. So that's all irrelevant. The same applies to every other species, right? He says the nature of an ox is to give ox whatever ox can do. So ox cannot complain, not being a bird or something like that. Sheep is a sheep, human is a human. So whatever happens, he in a way wants to justify. So this is a tricky issue. He is trying to justify everything. And later on there will be philosophers who will criticize him because of that. because they did not like that justifying literally everything. Quite fatalistic note going throughout his writings, you will see. Now, he says, universal nature has brought you nothing you cannot endure. So whatever happens to you, this is typical Stoic thinking. Whatever happens to you, understand that, you can endure it. Sometimes it's very difficult, sometimes it's less, but you will survive it. You will be better after that. So don't complain about little things. Just face the world as it is, because this is your, in a way, destiny. Okay? Now there is another issue when it comes to the whole and isolation. He talks about our ability to comprehend things in their wholesomeness. So, for example, he says, look at the piece of loaf of bread, and you would expect it to be really smooth and perfect, but you can see cracks in that. And if you look at those cracks in bread, you may not like it because it may remind you that the baker wasn't very good. But then he says, if you look a little bit differently, you may realize that actually those cracks are the tastiest part of bread. So you may all of a sudden realize that even if it's something accidental, but belongs to the whole, it still can be very beautiful. So the same applies to figs, he says. When the figs are ripe, they break. But that doesn't mean that something is wrong with them. Just that accidental change, which is nature all about, is all about change, is something that you should understand as the part of the whole. So we should not look at the things in isolation. Then, as his writings are all about ethics, I always question the motive for that, the reason. Why are there always ethical issues? Because he clearly knows what was his role as an emperor and what has been done under his name. And he's trying to talk himself out of that destiny that not necessarily was he delighted with. And he says, I often wondered how it is that everyone loves himself more than anyone else, but rates his own judgment of himself below that of others. So he is very clinical about looking at other people and understanding that we pay too much attention to what other people say. So we should not be doing that, because he says emerald is green and is beautiful as it is. You may like it or may not like it, you may comment or not, but emerald is not going to change. So whatever is beautiful, he says, is going to stay beautiful regardless of what is said about it. As Heraclitus would say, one of the philosophers who influenced him, he would say, donkeys prefer straw rather than gold. So you should really look into yourself and don't worry about other people and their comments on you and their, even their praises. So what other people say, don't go into them, don't analyze what they said, what they did to each other, to you, but rather look and try to sneak into their souls and understand that even if they're doing wrong, they didn't do it because they wanted to do wrong. They've done it because they didn't know what the good is. So this is another very interesting point to think about, because it's very Christian as well. To forgive. So he's talking to himself and he wants to forgive all the others around him who were lying to him, who were stealing from him, who would betray him as they tried to do it. Some of the generals, for example, but he tries to forgive them that. Marcus is very much into himself. He knows that there is nobody around that he can talk to. There are not other people that he can really rely on. And then the only retreat that he can take is actually into himself. So he says in book 4, he says people often take retreats. They go to the seaside, they go to the mountains, to the countryside, trying to get retreat there, to get away from all the problems that they're experiencing. But the only place which you can always go and retreat from all the evil and all the problems around you is actually yourself. So you do not necessarily have to take yourself on the other side of the planet in order to feel better. You should do that all the time if you are able to understand that everything that matters to you is actually within yourself, is not outside. So this is the very strong point. This is something which actually can be employed in our everyday life. And he says, external things, they cannot touch your mind. They are inert. External things, but also other people. So nobody should be able to get inside your fortress, as he calls it. This is yourself, your inner self, your mind, and touch you there. So you should be able to understand that. And try to retreat whenever you want. You can do it, and nobody can stop you. Nobody can get you there. Nothing can touch you there. So this is very powerful Stoic saying, and maybe we can say advice as well. And he says, remember that your directing mind becomes invisible when it withdraws into self-sufficiency. Free from passions, your mind is a fortress. People have no stronger place to retreat. And once again, he talked about praise, again, other people. So he said you should not really care about praise, about applause and flattering comments that you can get from other people from what you have done. Don't worry about it. He says that should not worry you as well, because that doesn't mean anything. Nothing will change. Again, he says you can take an emerald, for example, and you can say everything about it, and you can worship it as long as you want. But that stone is never going to change. It is what it is. So when you do something, don't expect to be praised for that. And always do what is necessary. Because if you spend time on doing the things which are not necessary, you're going to simply waste your time. And as you know very well, it says, look at Caesar, look at Pompey, look at Alexander. Where are they now? They achieved so much, but they're gone, they're dead. So remind yourself at any time that people die, and you will die, and everything around you will die, and it will disappear in time. So the time that you're having in this world right now is the most precious. So use it by doing what is necessary, because only that will count, only that can improve you in any way, not unnecessary trivial things. There is, again, very interesting point there in book 5. I spoke about that in a few different occasions during different lectures. When I spoke about Jesus, for example, I spoke about agape as unconditional love. And I questioned that in my article as well, if it is humanly possible at all. What is unconditional love? Now, he says something very similar. He says, when you do a good thing, do not expect anything in return. Because he says you're not doing it in order to get something in return. You're doing it because it's a good thing and it should be done. And he says there are 3 different types of people. The first type of people is, as such, as when they do something good to somebody, they can't wait to get it back. They talk to everybody what they've done. They're constantly reminding the debtor of what they've done to him, and they're constantly on it. The second type of people, he says, is there are people who, when they do good, they don't pressure much, but inside themselves, they constantly think about getting the same in return. But he says intelligible people, they're different. When they do good, they forget about it. So that's a very interesting, a very strong point, right? Buddhist scholar Shantideva says something very similar about that. He says, when I do a good thing, for me it's the same as when I'm eating a meal. When I finish the meal, I forget about it. It's done, it's gone. Move on. Do another good. But don't expect that in return. Now the question is it possible? So this is another one that we can talk about. Think about love. Can you love without being loved? But that is for a discussion. Also, Marcus Aurelius tries to remind us, well, he's talking to himself. And I'm taken by the momentum now, but he's trying to remind us. He's not, he's talking to himself. And he says that whenever he looks at the things, he's trying to get rid of appearances. So for example, he says, you need to look at the things as they really are, not just what impression they leave on you. For example, he says, when you have a roast beef on the table, he says, don't be taken by impression. Understand that this is just the meat of a dead animal. And there's nothing else, nothing special about it. When you drink wine, this is just juice, grape juice. So try to think about deeds and other people in the same manner. Analyze, strip them down of those impressions, and then you will get to the essence of who you are really dealing with. And this is probably, this must have been some of the biggest problems, because imagine an emperor with unlimited power, wealth, every single desire fulfilled whenever he wanted, as much as he wanted, and then people around him must be asking for something all the time, must be lying all the time, must be pretending to be something else, not what they are in essence. So this is why this moment is very important, that he says strip away, he's reminding himself, strip away appearances and look into the naked essence of everything you do and everyone around you. When it comes to good and bad, he says don't look at the good and bad outside yourself. Don't look at the things outside in the world, material things, other people. If you find that something good or something bad is outside you, then you're going to have lots of problems in life, because good and bad things will be happening. Sometimes you will be impressed by something good, but it's not going to be really something important, or something bad will happen and you will feel really low, but that thing has nothing to do with you. So he says, instead of looking at good and bad outside, in the outside world, try to see that good and bad within yourself, because you are the one who is judging about the world, and you shouldn't be. You should be really focusing on yourself. This is very similar to Nietzsche's approach as well, about our impression of the world and our power to impose values on everything around ourselves. There is nothing good and nothing bad in nature, says Nietzsche. Everything is neutral. But we decide that this is good and this is bad. So Marcus Aurelius was first to acknowledge that in a way. He praises community a lot. This is probably Aristotle's influence. And he says that human beings are created to live in community, and therefore you are the part of that community. This is your whole, that social unit. So you have to be part of that, and you have to have that in mind all the time, in order to communicate with that community and be part of it. Now, I don't know which community he talks about. Is it just Roman community, his closest community? But it's clearly not the world community, because across the border there are people not necessarily that he sees himself as a part of the same world. They are barbarians, right? So this is questionable about the community. And he says, I'm a limb of the composite body of rational beings. So he said, always think about yourself as a limb. Don't think about yourself as a part. Don't denigrate yourself. You're not a part, you're a limb. You're contributing to, like a limb to the body, because body without a limb is very deficient. So don't look at yourself just being a part of the community. So this is something clearly typical for our world now, how much we see ourselves as the limbs and how much we appreciate community and our contribution to community. What it is. How do we contribute to our community? So this is something as well interesting to discuss. When he talks about material possessions and external causes, clearly for a Stoic that is not important, because all these are all things that come and pass. You should only have things, he says, he talks to himself again, big question mark, he's an emperor, he's the richest man of the world, in the world, and he says you should only have things that you can clearly lose and not be hurt. Because if you have something that you value too much, then if you lose it, and you may lose it because it's a material thing, then you're going to get hurt a lot. So he says it's entirely up to you. So he's talking to himself again, reminding himself about necessities, about community, about good and bad, about material possessions. So he is trying to bring everything very, very low in order to not to suffer in case he lose everything. He's been criticized for that very much. Life and death, he reminds us that that is a natural thing, is the part of the whole, and we should not fear that because it's going to happen to everyone. But we should cherish life even more, because if we know, if you look at history, the past, we see all these big names, emperors, philosophers, they're all gone. But this is all the part of the whole, of that universal nature. So being aware of our existence and our participation in that universal nature, we are helping ourselves having much better quality time with ourselves and with others. In book 8, Marcus Aurelius is spelling out, maybe he's the most honest in that part, when he says that he couldn't live like a philosopher. So basically he's opening his cards to himself. Born in a royalty, becoming a emperor, he couldn't live the life of a philosopher, like for example Socrates or Diogenes. And he, in a way, he feels a little bit, sad about this, because he would, if he can, he would change that. Just to remind you about the legend, we don't know if it's true or is it a legend, about Alexander the Great when he met in Corinth Diogenes. And Alexander wanted to meet him, Diogenes from Sinope, not the other one, Latium. And Alexander wanted to meet Diogenes and talk to him. So Diogenes was sitting on the sun, enjoying the sun, and Alexander appeared on a horse, and he looked at him from above, and he said, Diogenes, he says, "What can I do for you?" Diogenes looked at him and he said, "Don't take from me what you cannot give me. Just move away from the sun." So Alexander responded, "If I wasn't Alexander, I would love to be Diogenes." So this is the same thing that is troubling Marcus Aurelius. And he says that. And he says, if you have seen truly where the matter lies, then leave behind your reputation and be content, even if you live the remainder of your life, however long, as your nature wills. Nowhere in so-called reasoning, wealth, reputation, enjoyment, nowhere do you find living well. So he says, where do you find it? What is living well? Where do you find it? He said, well, you have to follow certain doctrines. And he says, which doctrines? This concerning goods and evils, that nothing is good for a human being which does not make them just, temperate, courageous, free, and that nothing is bad which does not make them the contraries of the aforementioned. I will just tell you one more thing to finish my part introduction with this. In book 12, he concludes as well, and he says, if it's not right, don't do it. Okay? And if it's not true, don't say it. So I think I have managed to present you both sides of this great person, the emperor and the thinker, somebody who's looking for penance and never intended his thoughts and ideas to be published. And I hope that now you have lots of questions to ask. So thank you very much for being patient, and please